Welcome, everyone. I'm going to play a little compilation video I made about deconstruction from TikTok, just for fun. As we gather, check this out.
Lord, I no longer believe, drowned in living waters, cursed by the love that I receive.
I need you to know that I did really try. I tried really hard, but I just can't help it.
Leaving the faith and unlearning my faith. It was hard, and I hated myself, and I hated the church, and I hated God, and I hated everyone that made me feel like I wasn't doing things right. Even though inside I was happy, I hated it. And I finally got to a place where I wasn't so angry anymore, and I wasn't mad at the world, and I forgave God. Whatever it is, whoever it is, I forgave it. If I can just live the way I want to live, and I can be a voice for people to do the same, it's just so hard not to resent that.
I need you to know that I did really try. I tried really hard, but I just can't help it.
So welcome to Still Processing, everyone. I made that little compilation because I know that not everybody is chronically online, and I am chronically online. And so I am seeing this kind of stuff all the time in lots of different platforms. These were all pulled from TikTok, but go to Reels, go to Instagram, go to Facebook. You're going to see all kinds of stuff like this, and I just wanted you to have an opportunity to see some of the stuff people are putting out there about their struggles and about what feels like has happened to them in some cases, the ways in which they've left. Many of them would use the word like escaped. And I'm not going to say much more about it than that. I just wanted you to see some of these people and the ways in which they're struggling, because this is the topic tonight. What is happening and why? And we're going to focus mainly on Canada. And that is why we have Angela Reitsma Bick with us. We're grateful to have her. We're going to be speaking about her book, Undone, and I have to look at it. It's not just Undone. Blessed are the undone, testimonies of quiet deconstruction of faith in Canada. So it's not just happening here, though it is happening here. It's happening to some degree everywhere. Maybe it's concentrated in Western countries now, but this is not, I don't think this is going to stop. I think this is going to continue. I'm going to introduce Angela. When you're ready to speak, you do have to turn it on there, yeah, perfect. Angela has her M.A. in literature from Queen's University and has an honors English B.A. from Redeemer University. Under her leadership as editor-in-chief from 2009 to 2025, the Christian Courier, an independent Canadian publication, expanded its online readership and won dozens of awards. During that time, her own writing was recognized for excellence in religious journalism with the prestigious A.C. Forrest Memorial Award in 2016, and by the Deborah, do you know how to say the next one? Figgith? The Deborah Figgith Social Justice Award in 2018 for outstanding work that addresses social justice issues. And in 2020, Angela received the Distinguished Alumni Award from Redeemer University. In 2026, Angela debuted a graduate-level course offered online to lifelong learners across North America through the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto, which we will have time to talk about. We'll make time at some point to do that. And it explored contemporary Canadian literature and its depiction of the legacy of the Christian church. Angela has edited memoirs, monographs, and anthologies, and traveled across Canada as a guest speaker. Again, her book, Blessed Are the Undone, is her first book. And I want to make sure that we say she co-authored the book with Peter Sherman, who has a variety of training, but I'll just name two things that he is: a sociologist and a scholar of religion. She lives in Newcastle, Ontario with her family, and her daughter Alba is with us. If you bought a book, you bought it from her daughter Alba, who's accompanied her on this trip. Angela, we're grateful you're here and grateful to have you.
It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me. And I'd like to say a special hello to two of my students from that first ICS class who are here tonight, Barbara and Chris. Thank you for coming. It's really nice to meet you in person. We met on Zoom, and they're here tonight, which is wonderful.
I forgot to say something about who I am and what this is.
Yeah,
just a common problem that I have. I'm always like, let's dig in. I'm Joshua Viss. I'm the creative director and host of Still Processing. We started Still Processing in November of 2022. Have been meeting monthly, sometimes bi-monthly, in gatherings like this, exploring all kinds of things, but certainly part of the impetus for Still Processing was the deconstruction that I was going through, my father was going through, other people in my life were going through. And we wanted a space where we could talk openly about whatever was happening, whatever we thought might be true and good. And so we created this space and called it Still Processing, because we continue to process, and that is something we think will not end for us, actually. As we deconstructed religion, we started deconstructing all kinds of other things that we realized had been a part of who we were, and we hadn't thought enough about it. Just to give one example, patriarchy is one example of something I've thought a lot about since we've started Still Processing. I came across, I'm going to just read this poem real quick to you, and then we'll get started. I opened a piece of paper on my island about 2 hours ago, and this is what it was. And it felt to me like it reflected what we're trying to do here in Still Processing. So I said, let's put it up here. Let's put it on a slide and talk about it. I don't know where it came from. I'm still trying to figure that out. There is no power greater than a community discovering what it cares about. Ask what's possible, not what's wrong. Keep asking. That's a hard one for me. What's wrong consumes me often. Notice what you care about. Assume that many others share your dreams. Be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. Talk to people you know. Talk to people you don't know. Talk to people you never talk to. Be intrigued by the differences you hear. Expect to be surprised. Treasure curiosity more than certainty. Invite everybody who cares to work on what's possible. Acknowledge that everyone is an expert about something. Know that creative solutions come from new connections. Remember, you don't fear people whose story you know. Real listening always brings people closer together. Trust that meaningful conversations can change the world. Rely on human goodness. Stay together. That describes Still Processing so well for me in a way that I haven't even been able to articulate for myself. This is part of what we're trying to do here. And we're grateful to have you with us to help us try and do that, Angela. Angela's going to bring us through her work, and I am going to move the slides along and sometimes ask a question and maybe give a comment. And then we'll move into some other questions, and we'll give you time for questions. But that's what we're going to do today, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'm grateful to see a lot of familiar faces, new faces. We're grateful you're here. Angela, take it away.
Okay. Thank you for that poem. I think it's a beautiful opening, and it's exactly what you're doing here.
Thanks.
Yeah. And we'll trust that some meaningful conversations will occur, and that these are the conversations that matter. Yeah, and thank you to everyone for coming, and thank you for your curiosity in what's happening in Canada, especially. So, as Josh said, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the landscape of faith in Canada, which I think has some similarities and a few key differences to your context. I can actually summarize it in just 6 words. The priests are the bad guys. Do you have that here? Let me explain. Every September, if you go to a public library in Canada, you'll see a display of books, picture books, chapter books, reference books, graphic novels like this one, that shows the history of residential schools in Canada. It would all be set up for September 30, which is our National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, also known as Orange Shirt Day. So you see a lot of shirts like this one. Most schools will mark the day by wearing orange to raise awareness about the thousands of Indigenous children who are taken from their parents and sent to boarding schools under pretty bad conditions. The schools were run primarily by the Canadian government and Canadian churches, Catholic, Anglican, Presbyterian, Methodist. You had them in the States too. That's actually, if you go far back in history, where the Canadian government got its idea, but from the federal Indian boarding schools. But it is shocking to see a colorful children's picture book, if you want to hold this up, and it's also on the next slide.
Stop taking our bad ideas, please. Yeah. To the world, I beg you.
Good note. Write that down. It is just shocking to see. This is a children's book, right? With the nuns, and they're like avenging angels or these giant kind of evil bats. If you go to the next slide, it's shocking to see kids cowering in fear from priests. Now, Orange Shirt Day is relatively recent. When I was a kid in elementary school 30 years ago, the priests were still the good guys. But since 2008, at least officially, Canada has gone through deep and painful reckoning over the harm caused by these residential schools. So in my lifetime, which is pretty quick actually, there's been this big shift from they meant well, which is sort of what was accepted when I was younger, to now it's accepted that the church has caused great harm. What are we going to do about it? How can we make amends? So almost every denomination in Canada does have some kind of committee. There's a group. They've taken some action. They talk about it. I wouldn't say it's perfect, but at least they're trying.
But you're saying there's not a Christian group mounting some opposition to what's happening?
No.
Not a significant?
Right.
Okay.
No, it's accepted. And denominations officially, to different degrees, are working on it, I would say. On the next slide, you can see last spring, I stood by this grave marker for students outside Kamloops Residential School in beautiful setting in northern BC. And it was very jarring. Schools shouldn't have graves. Now, if you pick up a book about Canadian history, the people who believed and taught the Bible, they're the bad guys. So all that to say, Christianity in Canada is on thin ice, at least in terms of its reputation. In fact, an earlier version of our book was going to be Church on Thin Ice. But then when we came up with the camping metaphor, we kind of had this problem with the conflicting seasons, because what are you going to do with the canoe if it's icy? So we had to drop it. But it's still true that you could say the church in Canada is on thin ice, which is a pretty humble place to be. Talk about
still now, you're saying.
Yes.
So it started in 2008, but you're
Yep.
feeling like it's carried over.
Yep. So in addition to the reputation, which is what this gets at, you could look at the stats, right, which we talked about a little bit last night. So just 2 generations ago in the 1950s, which is when both sets of my grandparents immigrated to Ontario from the Netherlands, 67% of Canadians attended church. Both sets of grandparents, all 10 kids on both sides. Now it's closer to 11% of Canadians attend church.
And that's, you said, from when? When is the first stat from?
The 50s.
Okay.
Yeah. That's church attendance. If you look beyond that to what they would click on the census, how they self-identify, the number's a little higher. 42% of Canadians would say they're Christian, whether or not they go to church. Here, I think it's closer to 62.
I do have a, let me snag it. I did put it in here just in case we came to that. Let's see if I can find it. That is 2007.
Okay.
These are 2007 numbers, 78% Christian, 16% unaffiliated.
Okay.
This is 2023-24 when these numbers, 62%, 29% unaffiliated, 62% Christian. So yeah, that's right on. So and 36% is the last number I have on nuns or in Canada.
Right, the N-O-N-E, the nuns, yep. Yeah, so you could say that for the first time since Canada became a country, Christians no longer make up the majority. So that's why in the course I taught for the ICS, we had the phrase, reading the ruins, because you could say we are standing in the ruins of Christendom in Canada. So I'll give you one more example. Our family went to a live taping of a comedy news show hosted by Canada's National Broadcasting Corps, the CBC. Anyone heard of it? Yes, okay. So we are big CBC radio fans in our house. My kids track closely with the news. If you have a chance to talk with Alba in the back.
Would that be like PBS for us? It's public broadcast.
Yes.
CBC is publicly funded?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Or maybe like NPR, similar to that.
Yeah, I would say closer to NPR.
Yep.
Though I'm not super familiar with it. Yeah. But, publicly funded, a little bit left-leaning. My kids track pretty closely with current events, so we were excited to be there, to meet the host, to see what it was like to be in the studio. So this comedy show, it makes games out of the current news headlines of the week. And you can, join in and participate. It was a really good experience overall. But it was also, I have to tell you, awkward because my son was there. He's 13. He was 13 at the time. And about half of the jokes were at the expense of the church. Or to be more specific, at the expense of the failures of the church. So now, if you can picture this, Christians are the bad guys, and they're the punchline. It's pretty awkward. Especially the one extended joke about a little toy pilgrim that the radio host said should not be part of the Catholic Church's marketing campaign to children. So, okay, that's pretty dark humor. Banking on the fact that the audience would know this heartbreaking legacy of sexual abuse perpetrated by Catholic priests against children. How much of that am I going to tell my son? When he says, what does that joke mean? Like, what is that about? How much of that am I going to tell my two older daughters, 18 and 20 at the time? They probably know more of the history, but not all. And I've started to think about the ways that the people I see react to those kind of situations. And I think they sort of fall into 4 categories. And you might recognize some of these responses in yourself or in some of the people you know. So the easiest thing in the world really is to say, never mind, to my son, right? Never mind, I don't want to explain it. Let's not talk about it. Just push that one under the rug. Essentially, then you're saying, things are fine. We're not actually standing in the ruins, right? Or second, it's human nature, I think, to get kind of defensive, maybe even angry. And you say, well, what about da-da-da-da-da-da? They're ignoring all the good things that the Catholic Church has done.
Whataboutism is so popular.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've encountered this. It's like a new phrase for an argument technique, which is like if you can't counter or give an argument based on what's being talked about, you do. But what about this over here against your sort of opponent? And it's called whataboutism.
Mm-hmm. And you're ignoring then or negating.
You're ignoring the main thing you're supposed to be arguing about and trying to find ground where you feel like you have a stronger argument.
Yeah, you're basically standing there saying, these ruins used to be so beautiful. Third option is to say, this happened. And you give an honest, and in the case with my kids, age-appropriate overview. Then you're saying, this is why we're standing in the ruins, right? And I think that's what we're doing tonight. And the hopeful fourth option that I think was described in your poem, actually, is the kinds of conversations that are given a little bit of permission to occur if I went one step further and I said to my kids, these are some of the guidelines that exist now that are actually keeping kids in churches and schools safer. Isn't that great? And then you're starting to think about we could rebuild and do it a little differently. So any conversations like those last two, those are the ones that bring me hope. But you can see in the tension there a few of the competing narratives for what it means to be a Christian and who gets to define it, right? And in Canada, we get caught up in these tensions all the time, especially when you add in this mistaken identity, which is when we're mixed up about whether our access to power matches the American churches. Spoiler alert, it does not.
Well, I was just thinking there's this funny way in which you are caught between Europe and the United States. And
Yes.
actually, numbers-wise, in terms of what's happening, that's right where you find yourselves right now.
Yep.
And so yeah. Anyways.
Yeah, no, that's very real. Because you have to think that CBC Radio assumes it's punching up, not down, right? It's the number one rule of comedy. If they're making fun of the church, they think that that means the church is then more powerful than them. And it's because of its history. People align the church with power. And I think it's still true. You can do that here in the States, but it's not true in Canada. Christians are now in the minority. So if the media, and I think it's true for academia as well, if they think Christians are operating from a place of power, but it doesn't match the feeling of, oh, I'm going to church, 3/4 of the church is empty, then Christians feel picked on. And then you start to hear language like persecution. Do you hear that too?
Do we hear that? Yeah, Christians here really, really, in all seriousness, there is a lot of power in being a victim. In being able to say, I'm actually the victim in this situation, it changes the power dynamic entirely, right? If you can pull it off.
Right.
And so, yes, all the time. So my TikTok feed is mostly deconstruction stuff, but every once in a while I'll get the opposite. And it is almost always a persecution complex of some kind.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of defensiveness, I think. But then the people outside the church are saying, well, you had the mic long enough. Your turn is over. Why don't you own up to these failures? Why are you setting yourself up to be a punchline at all, right? So that's just a brief snapshot of Christianity in Canada today. This tension between perception and reality, between the U.S. and Canadian and European context, between the past and what it is now, and really what it might become or where it's going. And inside of all of that, there's individuals who are deconstructing their faith for very valid reasons. And that's what our book is about. It's a brutally honest look at the problems with that unflinching starting point. This is what happened. And our book argues it's not the time to get defensive or nostalgic, but to connect the dots between church hurt and the ruins of Christendom, and then wonder together, if we can get there, about how to rebuild. You might say whether we can rebuild.
Yeah, I would be. It's a question for me.
Sure.
Whether it's probably twofold: whether we can, and even whether we should.
Yeah.
Whether that's a good use of our time.
Yeah, it's fair. I think there's a lot of room for good questions here about that reconstruction process, about whether we're even the generation to have it, right? I don't have the answers. Church might look totally different for my kids than it did for me, but these are really important questions. So that's the context. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book's backstory, our definition of the word undone, and then the reasons why we found Canadians were deconstructing. So, yeah, you can go ahead. Oh, I missed a few pictures here. These were just fun other covers. There were over 200 titles we worked through before getting to Blessed Are the Undone. These are just some of the headlines that I already talked about.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing so many of the same things, of course.
Ones.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And here are my kids at the at CBC. That's the host. It's actually cut out. Okay, so this brings us to Christian Courier. For 16 years, I was the editor of an independent faith-based publication. Some of you might recognize Bert Whitvoot there at the top. He was a wonderful mentor to me. So this was a fully...
He was the previous editor that
Yes.
you took over
Yeah.
from? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was fully independent publication with roots in the Christian Reformed Church. So 16 years works out to about 312 issues, something like 9,500 articles. I don't know. And those years, 2009 to 2025, they were pretty wild years in publishing because of how quickly the news industry changed, right? And is still changing.
Exactly. Still changing
Yeah.
dramatically here in the States as well.
Yeah. The first time I was editor of my high school newspaper, we used a mimeograph machine.
I don't know what that is, but I believe you.
Yeah, it's old. It's very old. And now there's AI robots that are pitching stories. So
There's a whole nother,
yeah,
like we need like 5 still processings on AI as well.
yeah, definitely. So it was a whirlwind, and in the last 3 years of my time as editor, I began working on a side project with a colleague of mine. You can see Peter on the next slide. He's on the right, and that was our cover designer in the middle. Because the last 2 decades, they're a wild ride in publishing and also for the church, as I just was going over. So it's not only the residential schools, of course, but it's scandals, right? Division, debate, cracking the foundation of what used to be 3/4 of Canada. The Me Too movement, people under the bus, evangelical support for basically a criminal in the White House. Because Trump is really just as polarizing for us as he is here. In Canada, the wild ride for Christianity, especially in the last few years, has been epitomized by churches on fire. And not in a praise and worship kind of sense, like set our hearts on fire, but actual fire. Spike in arson attacks on religious buildings in the last 5 years.
You know, we had, there's a, in Bushwick, I think, New York, there was an RCA building that was recently burned. Huh. And it looks like it might be arson. So there's some of this happening on the east. That's the second RCA church that's burned down. So I don't know.
Wow.
I haven't heard like what's the theory there.
Yeah, it seems to be really hard to track that down and prove it and connect all the dots there. But that could have been another title, Churches on Fire. Peter and I tried to make sense of this phenomena of faith deconstruction with a focus on Canadians to understand why people are leaving the church. So as Josh mentioned, Peter's background is sociology. I'm a journalist, so we combined data and stories. We touch really briefly on our own experience, but the book as a whole was a research project. So in these in-depth interviews with 28 people who left the church. And then we analyzed their stories for overlapping reasons, and we found 7 of them, for why they question the faith of their childhood.
This is some of the people you worked with, like Rachel Den Hollander is somebody that maybe has, in the States, people have heard about her. We mainly heard about her because of the gymnast.
Yes,
Larry Nassar.
Larry Nassar, yeah.
That's, I think, where her name was most prominent here in the U.S. over the years. Yeah.
You can stay here for 1 sec.
Okay.
Yeah, all of the people we interviewed, we write about them using pseudonyms, but these are some of the more public figures, so I'm allowed to use their pictures. They're discussed in here. We interviewed them all as well during the research stage. So one woman we spoke to, she said the younger generation will have absolutely nothing to do with Christianity. We need to wake up to the harm we caused and try to find our way back. So that gives you a sense of the urgency that we felt as we were working on this. And the shortest definition really for undone in the book is just faith undone. So for individuals, it's that experience of having your affiliation with God, the Bible, or Christian faith fall apart, usually because of failures of the church. And then at the same time, you lose ties with your community. And it's a very devastating process. The word deconstruction gets at a little bit of that sense of unraveling. Undone conveys some of that pain too, I think. And I like the word because it takes away the culpability from the individual. People questioning their faith, they often get blamed for it. The problem is you. But what if being undone by the failures of the church is actually the most appropriate response? So 2 more things to add to that word, the categories. Sociologists talk about the nuns, we mentioned, N-O-N-E, the people of no religion. And the duns, they're done with religion, we added undone. To build on that, our thesis was that language needs to expand to fit what's happening. And you use the phrase unaffiliated. It's similar?
Unaffiliated is this, it's becoming this bigger category to describe agnostic, atheist, nothing in particular.
Right.
Because nothing in particular is pretty popular. It might be the biggest category of the 3 in the United States, which is this curiosity that people are trying to understand.
Yep.
What does that mean exactly, right? And so unaffiliated has become another word that's being thrown around by like Pew and other polling sources. Yeah.
Yep. And while we were working on this, I was so interested to learn that religion scholars used to focus on religious texts and key religious figures. They would study their sermons to try to define a group's beliefs. But now, more recently, there's been a shift to look at what the ordinary believers say and do. So this research approach is called studying like lived religion. So religion's human side, the life of the everyday people who say, yeah, this is what I believe in, and how they interpret it. So this reveals, the theory goes, the religious landscape more than creeds and confessions. So using that metric, then, you can see on the next slide, then my years in Christian journalism really were an exercise in understanding lived religion. And I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that decades of debate, scandal, and division have led to a crisis in lived religion, to quote my friend, Jared Siebert. And that's really what our book is about. So we've taken these stories of individuals deconstructing their faith, coming undone, and we've woven them together into an urgent call for the church itself to come undone on a corporate level. So to undo its malformed practices, such as patriarchy, which you mentioned, racism, homophobia, chasing after power. And I have to say, a lot of individuals have thanked us for this book. It is not that popular with institutions. I can say a little more on that later. Okay, so the people we interviewed, the 7 triggers, they ranged in age from 18 to 78. They came from just about every province in Canada. 4 of them identified as gay or trans. 1 was non-binary. I think they came from 21 different denominations originally. 7 of them were pastors at some point. And 4 say they no longer believe in God. They fully deconverted.
And one thing maybe just to note, maybe it's coming, but the evangelical movement here is much larger as a percentage of the population than it is in Canada. I think it's like 23% here in the U.S. and Canada's 6, maybe? Is that what I saw?
Yeah, that sounds right.
So that just feels like a dramatic difference in terms of the public conversation, perhaps, anyways, because I guarantee, well, you've seen it, the type of things you're talking about, like, hey, church, I interviewed these people, and these are some... They don't care. In the conservative church, they're just like, we don't give a crap about any of that stuff.
Right.
In a way that's like somewhat shocking to me, right? Just like the last SBC, we talked about Southern Baptist Convention, had sort of hinted at caring about the sexual abuse in the churches, and then at this last convention, they just said, we're done with this whole thing entirely. We don't care anymore. And it sounds like maybe you're saying there's less resistance in Canada.
To having those conversations?
Yeah.
To some extent, but they're not necessarily public.
Okay.
So if you think about the fact that people were coming to us with their stories, they are not making money. They didn't have to. They could just walk away, but they wanted to talk about it. And I think that's the missing piece in so many cases, that there's nowhere to have these conversations. So... yeah, you've already seen the screen. You've read through. These are the 7 triggers that we found came up. The most could be a whole handful for some people. One man I met last night said, I could pick 5 of those that were part of your story. Maybe for one person it's just one of them, but Doctrine of Biblical Inerrancy, Young Earth Creationism, Purity Culture, Clergy Sexual Abuse, History of Colonization, the Mistreatment of the LGBTQ plus community by the Church, and the Rise of White Christian Nationalism. That chapter is specifically connected to the first election of Donald Trump. So you can kind of look at that list and you can see there's 2 exceptions, the first 2. But other than that, all of these have to do with the behavior of Christians, right? More than their beliefs. So that's the crisis of lived religion. This huge gap between what Christianity professes and how Christian faith is being lived out. Any guesses about which one came up the most? Was that what you were going to say? Yeah.
I was ready for that.
Yeah.
Some of the people who were there last night are like, we know the answer. Do you want us to just say it or what?
Well, it would be interesting to know if it was the same here.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah.
Bingo.
You got it.
With a few close.
Yeah,
Clergy sexual
yeah.
abuse creeping up there.
Yeah.
The mistreatment of the LGBTQ community is the one that came out the most. As the graph shows, 50, what's that?
Yeah, 50% of the people
50%.
we interviewed
Okay.
mentioned that as a reason for their deconstruction. So
I expect, honestly, that would be the same here in the U.S. If I had to, I haven't seen anything this specific. So, like, just something to mention that maybe you want to look at later is Pew does a religious landscape study in the U.S. They did in 2023 and 24. So when you were talking about, like, instead of asking clergy what the church believes, the Pew landscape study asks Americans writ large what they believe on all kinds. It's a pretty amazing study. So if you want to see, like, how many people believe in heaven, how many people believe in hell, all that stuff is in the Pew religious landscape study, but I don't know that this was in there, this specific one.
yeah, no, those are helpful, those studies. And I think you could say that some of these factors transcend borders, as you mentioned. If you would say it's the same here, the mistreatment of the LGBTQ plus community, I would say clergy sexual abuse happens everywhere, small churches, big churches. But there is one trigger that came up more in Canada, and actually this chart is somewhat disappointing because I wish it was higher. And that's colonization, just reckoning with that, the church's complicity in residential schools. You asked about pushback, if it was kind of widely accepted. The local principal at the Christian school, he told me that he will get an equal number of phone calls from parents asking him to yes, have the kids wear orange shirts, and no, do not have the kids wear orange shirts. So it's not perfect.
And the orange shirt just sort of signals an
Yeah.
acceptance of the
Yeah.
truth and reconciliation
Yeah.
in which you learned about these schools. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's 3 reasons with a bit of their connection to place. But Peter and I really noticed that the 4 remaining factors for why people began deconstructing have roots in the U.S. Or more specifically, I could say the American industrial evangelical complex.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
It's interesting. I've been seeing, and I've been wondering about this too, is that the term evangelical is maybe better applies as a political term than a religious term. I'm seeing this conversation happening in the United States, and I can see some legitimacy to it, because if you call yourself evangelical, I know your political views immediately.
Right.
I probably also know your religious views, but I feel like, anyway, it's a conversation that's happening amongst, like, sociologists.
Right. But it was so crazy. Like, we're interviewing Canadians, right? But the American organizations kept popping up as we're talking to them. So things that influenced them, either as kids, teenagers, even now. Answers in Genesis, Chicago Convention, True Love Waits, Acquire the Fire, Focus on the Family, Teen Mania, all these American organizations. So in some sense, we had a feeling that what most of the actual Christian faith, most of our undone needed to deconstruct from was just this very specific flavor of a cultural American religion. So they had absorbed it because all of our churches are full of American books. The libraries, our curriculum, the small groups. Our conferences have keynote speakers from the States. And this flavor is probably true. It's the same list of things that ex-evangelical Americans would say they need to deconstruct from. So the trick is figuring out how to do that without kind of latching on to, you could say, the influencers who will now peddle something new, which might be deconstruction itself.
And this isn't unique to Canada.
Right.
The export of these particular ways of thinking about Christianity is affecting much of the global... I mean, I'm probably overstating the case in terms of what I understand, but, you know, like I know the Brazilian context, 'cause my partner's Brazilian, and this same stuff has come to Brazil from the United States. And I think the global South in general is a bit infused with some of these same issues, which concerns me greatly, because that's where Christianity is growing,
right,
is in the global South. And I fear, anyways, that it's growing with these same problems, if that makes sense.
Yep. An export you don't want.
It's an export we don't want. Who knows what we want anymore in the United States, actually? We're such a mess. It's hard to say. I don't want it. I don't like it. But there is a strong amount of people in the United States who think this is super important, what we're doing, bringing these things to the global South, obviously.
The last thing that I'll say about the Canadian context is just the subtitle of our book. It gets at what we think is another difference, the way people are leaving. So we called it The Quiet Deconstruction of Faith in Canada. It's actually hilarious because there's a couple of books by American authors calling what's happening right now the Great Deconstruction, which here, you know, in Canada, we're a little bit more apologetic, maybe polite. We're sorry about all this. It's just quiet. We're just leaving, you know, quietly. There's no fanfare. We're not slamming the door on our way out. We're just leaving. So that's why we called it The Quiet Deconstruction. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up with a short reflection on January 2026. If you remember, last winter, just 8 months ago, though it feels longer.
Okay.
Yeah, January. So 3 kinds of power at the time were making the headlines. This was when the Department of Homeland Security deployed thousands of ICE agents to Minneapolis. This is when Renee Good and Alex Preddy showed the world how radical it is to believe everyone's equal, everyone's worth defending. And then also in January, our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, gave a speech in Switzerland with a few lines that I think are worth quoting. Definitely. He said, "It seems every day we're reminded that we live in an era of great power rivalry, that the rules-based order is fading, that the strong can do what they want, and the weak must suffer. Faced with this logic, there's a strong tendency for countries to go along, to get along, to avoid trouble, to hope compliance will buy safety, but it won't." Then there's this bit where he talks about cooperation instead of competition. And then he says, "The powerful have their power, but we have something too. The capacity to stop pretending, to name reality, and to act together." So his point was political. So was Trump's. So were Alex and Renee's and everyone in Minneapolis who stood up for their neighbors, and I see the same choice facing the church. Between chasing this old form of power or naming a current reality and showing just really ordinary compassion, being the good guys, which is now countercultural. If the rules are based on competition and division, well, then in those moments, it's radical to be compassionate, right?
Do you know, I don't want to, I love all of that, and this is a bit of cold water that I'm about to throw on it. Have you heard of toxic empathy amongst Christians in Canada? Because this is a thing that now exists in the United States amongst the conservative church. This idea that there is such a thing as toxic empathy. There are books that have been written about it. It's all over social media. It's crazy. I don't even know where to begin to understand such an idea within Christianity, but is this come across?
Yes, I haven't heard it a lot, but I've definitely heard the phrase. It just seems like a way to attack empathy and discredit it, and that's horrifying.
It is, but you're setting up like there's these two possibilities, right? Are we gonna fight this, or will we accept it? And this is one of the ways that the conservative church in the United States has chosen fight and discrediting, is to say that like actually somehow Jesus wouldn't be for empathy.
Right.
Anyways, it just came to my head as you were talking about that, and I wondered if don't import that would be my advice if you can help it. It's awful.
Yeah, it just sounds like they're trying to take away that tool, so don't let them.
So let me ask you this. So you spent, how long did you spend researching and talking to people, to individuals? Well, how long was that process?
2 years.
Okay. What was it like to listen to those painful stories? Like, what did it do to you? Were you already in a somewhat of a deconstruction place? Did it take you there? How did it affect your personal faith and views on Christianity and the Bible?
Yeah, it felt like an honor, honestly, that people would open up and would share those stories. There were often a lot of tears. It felt like I'm not a qualified therapist. I would not have, the tools to respond, but just to even be a listening ear, I think, is a gift in some ways. Did it affect my views? Well, that reminds me of how the pandemic was a really weird time for journalists, because it's one of the only times, I think, in the world that journalists had to report in real time about an experience that every single person was living through, right? There were no exceptions to that. There were no objective outside observers for any of it. So it took kind of this extra step of your willpower, and I don't know that we actually could even pull it off totally, but to pull yourself out from the personal implications of what was going on, from the theories, from the tension, from the rules, to kind of set all that aside in order to write about it. That's a little bit what it was like, researching and writing Deconstruction in real time. Because, of course, at the same time as we were doing that, I exist as a Christian in Canada, kind of horrified and also affected by everything the president here is doing, who was elected by American evangelicals. And I'm also a lifelong member of the Christian Reformed Church, so this binational denomination currently imploding. And I'm also part of a local church and on a committee that was figuring out whether or not to disaffiliate. And then I'm also a wife and a mom and a family of teens, and there's young adults, and we're discussing this stuff. So yeah, in some ways that was tough, but it was also good.
Does it feel more comfortable now? Like in your family, in your community, you guys are still wrestling with this stuff. Does it feel like the wrestling has become just sort of a part of your life in a way that is comfortable, or is it still kind of like you're negotiating with it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would say still negotiating, because it feels like there's new reasons to become undone all the time. And I don't want more reasons. I don't need more things to wrestle with. But that seems to be the moment that we're in.
And you said of how many people were there total? And you said 4?
28.
4 out of 28 left entirely.
Yep.
So most stayed in some capacity.
Yes.
Or they stayed not necessarily attached to a church, but
Right.
attached to a Christianity in some capacity.
Yep. Or just even maybe held some of their beliefs. So maybe just Jesus,
Okay.
for example.
What does that look like? What is just Jesus, if you can, pull on that, we can pull on that string a little bit, like, what does that look like for them? Like, in comparison to, like, the full breadth of Christianity that they had accepted prior to then, what does that look like?
I think they're disillusioned with the institution, right, with organized religion. So, but there's still something, we heard this again and again, like I haven't given up on Jesus. I'm still, he's still inspiring, whether or not they would say he's the divine Son of God. That really varied, but his character, his life, what he embodied isn't like objectively pretty inspiring. So there's a lot of people that they would keep that kind of at the end of everything else, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think we see a lot of that. I see a lot of that in the U.S. as well. Like, and I have mixed, sometimes I'm like, keep going. I actually think you need to deconstruct Jesus too. That is how I feel, at least to some degree. But also, like, fully agree that Jesus is very inspiring and worth studying and incorporate, like, worth thinking about as you form, like, an imagination of what could be, if that makes sense. I'd fully agree with that. But I do see that same struggle in people here. It's sort of like the last piece that they hold on to a lot of the time. Anything you want to add there?
Nope, go ahead.
So how, you mentioned this a little bit, but how has it been received? How's the work been received in Canada? Maybe like what discourages you and what encourages you is maybe a second piece to that.
Sure, yeah. A lot of people, Peter and I both, we still get emails all the time. People say, thank you for this book. I felt like you were telling our life story. The word undone has really seemed to resonate with people. People appreciate the Canadian research. We don't have that much that's specifically Canadian about Canadians with a Canadian press. And so that's useful. It's actually being used as a resource at Regent College, at Redeemer, and I think Calvin Seminary in a missions class, which is great. So the honesty in the book tends to kind of lead to more stories. So people come up to me and they tell me about being kicked out of their family for deconstructing. Or there's one woman who came up to me in the bathroom and said, all 3 of my children have left the church. Like, will they come back?
This is a big thing happening here. As you bring that up, I think of it as parents and children being estranged from one another. And sometimes it's about religion, sometimes it's about a specific issue like LGBTQ, and that might also be because of religion. But the amount of estrangement within families that is happening in the United States it feels very intense. I've not seen any like numbers on it, but like anecdotally. And you're seeing some of that as well in Canada? Definitely.
Yeah, I think if adult children especially, are deconstructing, it can lead the rest of their family, the parents, it could be spouse, it could be in any direction, really. I think in the very best cases, it can spark a little bit of self-awareness. So I had a friend who said, wait a second, if I haven't grappled with any of this, does that mean I'm part of the problem? So those are good questions. And I've also done a bit of speaking to Christian school principals and teachers, because if you think about it, the same hot button issues are popping up in their context too.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So that's some of the positive feedback. I can tell you a little bit about the pushback. Before the book came out, Peter and I were on a podcast together hosted by the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada. And I think right from the start, like our thesis, kind of made them worried. Critics would say, they have said that our book is too liberal-leaning, it's biased, it's moralizing, or it's too critical of the church. I hear that a lot. This summer, I was hired to write an article by a leading Christian publication in Canada. They just said, hey, can you take your research and apply it to Gen Z? I was like, sure. So I wrote that. And then they canceled it at the last second. They said this reflects too badly on the church.
Yeah, well, what did it say about Gen Z in the church?
Yeah, well, you've probably heard these studies too, that young people are coming back to church.
It's been all over the map in the States.
Yep.
The most consistent one people like to say is that young men are coming back to the church, and it's like, duh, the church is made for them. And young women have woken up and are like, we're not doing this. And that seems to be true here in the United States. But we're still like, the data is still unclear.
I agree.
From what I've seen.
Yes, it's the same in Canada. It's only anecdotal that there's pastors saying they have more young people. There's not a study that has proven that yet. Basically, the article said when it comes to Gen Z, you kind of have two totally different camps. You might have young people, who they've never encountered church at all. They're brand new, essentially. There's no background. There's nothing to deconstruct. So pastors need such a range of skills to deal, to just know who's walking in the door. And then the other person could be fully deconstructing and wants to talk about all of these things. So that's really hard. But there was one pastor that I quoted who said, every Sunday from the pulpit, she said, you are welcome here, whether you're wrestling with things, you're learning new things, or she just kind of had a list. And it was really a beautiful way to just pull everybody in, no matter what their starting spot was.
Mm-hmm. May I ask you one more question?
Yep.
Then I'm going to play the video from Britt.
Sure.
And then we'll move on to questions from there.
Yep.
In the book, you did talk about that a lot of people are turning to therapy as a way, both to just be healthy as a person, to deal with the deconstruction and all the fallout from that relationally and personally. You did, I think psychedelics got mentioned in there maybe, just kind of briefly. And when I heard the therapy and the psychedelic stuff, as somebody who's not undone, but is just done with religion at the moment, I was like, that's my jam. Psychedelics and therapy are the way I'm moving forward. Both looking for my own personal health and health in my relationships, but also not giving up on spirituality entirely. That's probably where the psychedelics help me the most. I've had one major psychedelic journey with psilocybin magic mushrooms, and it was incredible. The only thing I could ever categorize as a spiritual experience was that experience. And of course, then you wonder, was it really spiritual or was it just a psychedelic, right? Obviously you wonder about those things. I think, as I recall in the book, it was sort of you felt like that was just a little too individualized for your taste, or I'm not really sure how to put it. But yeah, I just wanted to ask you that and ask you to reflect on that piece of it.
Yeah, you're getting at why the individualized approach concerns us. I think simply because there are just limits to our capacity to know things as individuals, right? There's limits to our own experience. We need other people. We need their stories. We need their wisdom. If we want this life of meaning and purpose, I think it can exist outside of organized religion. I think it's going to be easier to get there in community with others. You posted this TikTok about Mandami.
I did. Okay. Did you see it?
I watched it. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yes. Hosting the World Cup.
Uh-huh. So I did a this is probably my biggest TikTok. It had 1 million views and almost 200,000 likes. And all I said was, this is quite literally what Jesus would do. And then I showed Mamdani watching a World Cup game with inmates at Rikers prison. And I just happened upon it, and that came to me, and I threw it out there, and it struck a chord with a lot of people.
And you described that action as being like Jesus?
Absolutely. I think quite when I saw it, I was just like, this is so clearly a type of thing that Jesus would do.
Yeah, the line that came to mind for me when I watched that was from Victor Hugo, Les Miserables, where he says, to love another person is to see the face of God. And those small acts of compassion that we talked about earlier, that's one of them, right? And they only seem noteworthy. And, you made a TikTok about it because it's so different from everything else happening right now, right? So, yeah, they're just so rare. So maybe something, and then I thought it was interesting that you called it Christ-like. And so maybe there's something I don't know. You're still seeking the face of Jesus, even if you're done. with religion, right?
Certainly still seeking goodness.
Because we need it.
Absolutely. I need it, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to play. Is this a good place to play this? And we move on then to questions?
Yep.
This is Britt Hartley. I did get it sort of short as I could. It's like 2.5 minutes. And I ran across this, and then as I was reading your work, I was like, oh, there's something here that maybe is slightly hopeful and maybe points to sort of a little bit of a path forward for something like what this community is and other communities out there. And Britt Hartley is coming to Still Processing October 1st. She is a former Mormon.
I would argue that the healthiest place that religious people get to and the healthiest place that nihilists get to is actually pretty similar. If you don't believe that the universe has any inherent meaning, if you don't believe in God, that you don't believe in an afterlife, you're kind of agnostic to ultimate reality, then the best thing that you can do is say, I don't know what's ultimately real, but participating in meaning and community and ritual and morality and authenticity and core values, etc., makes for a better life, even if it's just a game, even if it's for no other reason than making the experience of life better. This approach reduces suffering in you and also makes the world a better place, reduces suffering around you. And that's kind of the best that we can do with the cards that we've been dealt. Now, the religious people that are friends of mine or people that I respect, they're more likely to say, I don't know if the God that I believe in is real, but when I participate with this God of love or the parables of Jesus, it gives my life direction and meaning and love and morality and values and community, and they truly become better people as a result of this deeper spiritual practice. Both sides in this case have a lot of intellectual humility. Both sides resist kind of the problems of fundamentalism or the problems of like depressive nihilism. And I would say both of those groups of people are making the world a better place. In fact, you could look at a life of the most spiritual atheist and the most deconstructed Christian and like their lives and how they approach things and what they do and their service-driven life. From the outside, they're pretty similar. The biggest difference between them is just how they got there. The secular person had to build that up from scratch, and the person coming from a religious tradition had to deconstruct a lot of dogma and fundamentalism and bullshit in order to get to a pretty similar place. So one of the reasons that I'm not a militant atheist, of many, is that I don't believe in these utopian ideas that like if I could just convince the world to be like me, and if everyone was like me, then the world would be a better place. That's just not the world that we live in. Like maybe it's true if everyone was Christian or if everyone was secular that the world would be a better place, but that's just not the world that we live in. We live in a plural society. Religion is going to continue to exist. And the healthiest form of religion, the one that's really beautiful, the one that has a lot of intellectual humility, even though that's not the path for me, and even though I still disagree with it, that's not really my enemy. And this is where secularism and religion can actually be on the same team in trying to just reduce suffering.
This makes a lot of sense to me. In fact, if I look at this audience, that's what it is. It's people, some of whom are still in with Christianity, are attending church, still believe some of the dogma of Christianity, and some people who are out entirely or almost out or who don't go to church anymore. I think that's us, and I think she's describing a place where we're coming together. And one of the things that I think is the hardest one for a lot of people, mainly maybe religious people, but I also find myself in this place, admittedly, is intellectual humility. That's the thing that really brings these two groups. It makes it possible for these two groups to be together. A certain kind of humility of like, neither of us really understand ultimate reality. I can get militant. I mean, militant atheism is like pulling on my sleeve all the time. Like, get all these people out of church. It's bad for them. I feel that, admittedly. I do. But I have to listen to people like her and others who say, some of these folks are really comfortable in religion, and it's not my place to take that away from them. And partially because who am I to say that I understand and that I know, right? That I know it's not true. I don't know that, right? Those are just some thoughts that I had.
Yeah, no, my favorite thing in what she says there, I think you could actually ask her, or you could do it. Make a series. So where she says the healthiest form of religion, the one that's really beautiful, that has a lot of intellectual humility, even though I disagree with it, that's not my enemy. What if we could repeat that and say the healthiest form of X, Y, Z, okay? That the one that's really beautiful, even though I disagree, that's not my enemy. You just go down the list, get rid of enemies, left, right, and center.
Totally agree on that. Have been struggling to not have enemies, admittedly, I will say. It's a time that is just throwing enemies in front of me constantly, I must admit. And it's a struggle to know what to do with that, where to fight, where not to fight, right? It's been hard. I'm going to open it up for questions. And I will come to you with this mic.
Thanks, you guys. This was great. And Josh, pull this away from me if I go on too long. It's really just a reaction and a comment. If you recall, several weeks ago, was it Daryl was here presenting his, I think it was March. Yeah, and the topic was people leaving religion in the United States, and one of the comments made by either Daryl or his wife is the problem. One of the problems is if people leave religion, what do they go to? And I was watching it in a Zoom, and I texted a question or a comment, and I said, people should go to reality. And Daryl's comment was, well, there's, yeah, you could say that, but there are a billion different realities. So what is reality? So then I have to go to something that Josh and I talked briefly about. I gave him a book, and this is some science and cognitive science, and it has to do with how we create reality. And it is created by each of us individually. That's why we're all so different. Our realities are different, and they're based on perceptions. And we work through these perceptions, and we say, this is real. And someone else has different perceptions, and they'll say, well, but this is real. And so that's why community is so important, right? Because we can come together, and we can share our perceptions, and we might come to some understanding or some common agreement, or we might find common ground. And frankly, I had a really close friend who didn't grow up in the church. She had no belief at all. And I looked at her and spent time with her, and she had an ethics that was, in my mind, pure. Like, where did it come from? It didn't come from God. It didn't come from a God. It didn't come from an organization. It came from her. And it came from her affiliations, her family, right, her friends. And so that's when I began to move away from this idea of dogma that dictates how we should behave. I think we all have the potential, right? And Jesus was just a person. He wasn't a God. He was just a person who had values. And I think each of us have those values. And they're based on our perceptions, and they're based on our experiences purely. And so I think that could be something to talk about.
Perfect. I was just about to pull it from you. Perfect timing. I have something that I want to reflect on just for a second, but do you want to go? Do you have something popping up for you immediately? Then go.
Yeah, I just, a little bit building on what you were saying and a little bit building on what Britt was saying about, I wonder if things are set up to help people reach a spot where we care about suffering. That was her point. And it's a little bit what you're saying of like understanding what's happening. I have this clear memory of when my kids were younger and we had some friends over. So let's imagine like 6 kids at the table. Okay. They're toddlers, they're preschoolers. And I gave them all some raisins. And there was one kid just like so convinced they got the least amount of raisins. Okay. And they're making a big fuss about it, asking for more. But then there's another kid who notices that someone else doesn't have as many raisins as they do. So I just think some of it's innate, some of it's learned. It's hard to understand how, what people's starting points are, but I want to know what kind of world helps us notice that the way that it is innate for some people. So.
Yeah, it reminded me of something that I've been reflecting a lot on, which is, and it's also in the book, and you guys are sort of wrestling with it in the book, as I recall, which is the movement from an external authority to an internal authority. And that's something I've come to really value for myself, and is something that is a piece of advice that I do give to people, religious or not, is that I do think it benefits all of us to move away from relying so heavily on an external authority, which can be, it can be a pastor or a teacher, or it can be sort of abstractly God, or it can be the Bible. And I'm pushing against that idea that you need an external authority, and really trying to live into finding internally what I feel is good and true, not only with myself. Obviously, I have this community and I have lots of things that I read and take in, but I think I'm for that. I guess I would say the movement from external to internal, which I think is partly what you're suggesting for people. Anybody else? Questions?
I don't know necessarily how to frame this, but all your 7 issues to me are centered on the human condition. Even biblical inerrancy and creation are human interpretations. What about just the coming undone with the revelation of God? For me, the undone aspect is people who are sincere and loving and caring and just believe things that I can't even understand. And I'm saying my concept of God was that God would reveal the truth to all of us. And that hasn't happened in a way that I can even comprehend, because revelation is so outside of what I have seen. Even, what Josh is saying just now is a revelation that's been given to him individually, personally, whatever, from somewhere. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, on the 7 things, there's nothing that says, ultimately my disappointment is with God.
It leaves it leaves some space for the possibility of rethinking God in a way that isn't offensive. Like, I think that for a lot of people, the concept of God that they've been given has become offensive to them. Right? So if a God that hates LGBTQ people it's offensive to people now. Does that make sense? And so then there's the wondering of, like, can a different type of God that is also somehow maybe close to the biblical text be articulated and then be worth believing in? I don't know if I'm getting at, maybe I'm changing it too much there. But I think there is some space that exists for something different in all of that.
Yeah, did you catch the one book cover of among our different samples was God Undone? I think, if I'm remembering correctly, we went through so many titles, but I think that was on our list of things that we thought would get mentioned before we were able to start interviewing people. We did about a year of research, and then we had our own ideas, right? Kind of had this list of, like, yeah, they're probably going to talk about da, da, da. We thought there would be more, but it didn't come up. So we didn't end up heading in that direction. It wasn't mentioned by the people we interviewed, so we moved on. That painting, by the way, is it's a crucified bird in a series done by a Canadian artist, and there's one of them in our book, and she's expressing what the feeling is of deconstruction. It was a little too bloody to end up on the cover, but it has a certain appeal.
Anyone else?
Thank you for being here, and thanks for your research and book. I'm just curious if you've had any positive or negative changes in your traditions or your just path in life as you've gone through all this change or research. For me personally, leaving organized religion, my moral compass is on reducing suffering, as Britt Hartley was saying in that video. And so part of that for me is I'm pursuing going vegetarian, because that's extending it to animals, just reducing suffering. So that's one thing for me that has changed as I went through deconstruction. And so I'm just curious if you've had any changes in your walk of faith or just walk of life or in anything. Can be something small. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I don't think anyone has asked me that before. And my daughter's here, so she could she could probably give you a really good answer that would be give a little more clarity than what I can think of. I mean, we are as a family, as I mentioned, our home church. I was on a committee. We were part of this, the research, the work. We put in the work. It was Christian Reformed. And then there was a vote and decided to not disaffiliate from the bigger denomination, and that has been hard. For our family, we have stopped attending. The last time we went was June 5. We're looking for another church. It's really difficult. I don't enjoy it.
Church shopping, you mean?
Well, I actually hate regular shopping. So
I see.
Church shopping is two things that are just...
Maybe this is a sign that you are actually done. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I don't know. So that's one thing, I guess. And then just a lot of conversations. Maybe, Abba's willing to chat with anybody after, I think. Are you, Abba? Yeah, she's willing. I mean, I think I have another example. That cartoon, David Hayward, the deconstructing one, he's a Canadian cartoonist. Have you heard of him, by the way? Down here, he goes by the Naked Pastor. Yeah, okay. So hardly anybody knows he's Canadian because he makes a lot of cartoons, about Trump, actually. And you sort of think he's American. But he lives in New Brunswick. He's Canadian. He's one of the people we interviewed. And part of as my research, I bought he has a hardcover book of all his cartoons. And then it's laying around the house. And it's a little bit the same as my opening anecdote about the CBC story where, I'm flipping through the cartoons. Some of them make me laugh, out loud. Some of them I hated. I want to rip out the page and throw it because it offended me. Okay. And some of them I was like, well, which ones do, I want my kids to see? And, So he's kind of all over the place. But some of them, the older kids picked up the book, and then, you know what? It started a really good conversation about what that cartoon was about. So I think maybe that's something that's just been they've read the book, it's happening, we're living it, and and just to keep talking about it has been really important for us.
I think as someone who firmly grew up on a Midwestern diet, it might actually be harder for me to give up meat, which you are right about. Mm-hmm. I never pretend that somehow there's a good justification for eating meat. But I think it might be easier for me to give up Christianity than give up meat, if I'm being honest, and I have tried. But I salute you because you're absolutely correct that when you start going down this path of wanting to reduce suffering, that what you're naming, if you believe that these other sentient beings have value and worth, you are doing more good by giving up meat than almost anything. It's a huge, huge thing. Kudos. Anyone else? Dan, give it to us, buddy.
Thank you. Thanks, Josh, and thanks, Angela, tonight for being here. Thanks, Marlon and Josh. I just asked if I could say a few words to give you a few more resources and connect a few dots. My name is Dan Behrens. I live in Zeeland, Michigan, and I'm the chair of the board of the Institute for Christian Studies in Toronto. No, how does that work? Talk to me afterwards. I think I'm internally Canadian. I've resonated in my life with the post-World War immigration of Dutch immigrants to Canada who are much more focused on social justice issues, as opposed to, I'm really a grandchild of pietist seceders who came to this area. ICS is a graduate school begun in the 60s. One of the founders of that community is here with us tonight, Dr. Barbara Carville, who wrote The Gift of the Stranger. Excellent book. And also past president of the Friends of ICS in the U.S. I wanted to point out, last year we began a movement called Free to be Faithful. And it's really equipping Christians for democratic life. Angela was one of our pilots last year and did a wonderful job teaching the course for us. It's a very reasonable course, 6 weeks, $400 Canadian, $289 US. Maybe that will change. But anyway, she's going to be teaching for us again this year. There are brochures in the back. If you're interested, talk with me or pick up a brochure. We are a still processing kind of place. One of the few reformed institutions where you can still ask questions, not get in trouble. So some of you know that, what I'm talking about. We made headlines last January by saying we're breaking with the CRC on the human sexuality issue. So we're small, but hope to have a significant impact in people's lives as they sort through these issues. And it's a safe place for all to come. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. I just want to give you a few things about what's coming, and then Angela has something she's going to close with. This is everything still happening this year. The next one is not until September, so we have about 4 weeks till the next still processing, and that is Matt Eicheldinger. I was hoping somehow that would be pronounced differently, but it is actually Eicheldinger. And he is a former teacher who's become a children's author, and he's got books that are for young adults, and he's got a new one called, I think it's called Sticky Notes, that's about his time as a teacher. The beauty of this is that it will be delightful. Do you know what I mean? It will be hopeful and delightful and uplifting. And Lord knows that still processing could use a delightful, uplifting presence. And he is that. You'll like him a lot. And as we get closer, I'll start sending out more stuff so you can understand who he is and what he's bringing to the table. And then these are the rest of the ones for the year. Big stuff. Big issues after that. Britt Hartley, you saw. Kate West on Escaping Christian Patriarchy. Trans Inclusion with a trans man, Skylar Byler. And then following that up with Tim Salgo, who has been a part of this community. Common Ground is a program that started to bring more awareness of LGBTQ people in sports. That's what Common Ground does. And then we're going to have a sound bath, which we had also last year. I think we had it in the summer. And this will be December 3 at Warehouse 6. This is a really cool opportunity as well. So we'd love to have you guys come back and join us for those things. We also would love for your donations so that we can continue doing this into 2027. And Angela's going to end with a poem. No, story. My bad. The poem we don't have time for. Yeah. My bad. That's right. Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. I'm going to tell you a story about when my brother-in-law had a truck stolen, but I just have to tell you quickly about somebody else who I interviewed. Her name is Julie McFarlane. She was abused by an Anglican priest in the UK over 50 years ago. She grew up. She kind of put it behind her. She grew up, she went to law school, became a law professor. She's at the University of Windsor. Then she heard in the news that this priest had abused somebody else. And she thought, okay, I have to come forward. So she did. She charged him and also the church. The case took several years. It went through criminal, civil levels. She won both cases. The priest went to prison. And the Anglican Church said, okay, let's settle with money. She said, no, I want you to change your policies instead. So that was it has made a huge change in the way the Anglican Church around the world. It's now being replicated all over. They now have the safest guidelines of any denomination for children and anybody. And so to me, that's a really hopeful story. And it shows that one individual can actually make a difference in this. You think institutions can't change? They can change. It just takes like a really determined, passionate, dedicated person. So while I was researching this book and talking to people like Julie McFarland, at the same time, my brother-in-law had a brand new, it was only 2 weeks old, Dodge Ram, stolen right out of his driveway. And the thieves, I don't fully understand it, but they used this kind of replicator. So they stood on the porch and they kind of could replicate his key fob or something. Gone. Truck was just gone. And okay, it was the beginning of the summer. He and my sister had to change a few summer plans, but as I was listening, in real time to all the effects that this experience of being robbed had on them, at the same time as I was researching the effects of sexual abuse and all these scandals, what really struck me was just how straightforward and pain-free the experience was as far as victimhood goes, right, from the truck. So I started jotting down a few things. What I was learning about how abuse cases move through the justice system. And really, the contrast is appalling. Nobody said to my brother-in-law, wait a second, are you sure it was stolen? Maybe you just lost your truck. Nobody said, I can't believe you let this happen. What kind of man are you? Nobody said, why didn't you park it in the garage, you idiot? Nobody said, this is really no big deal. Just get over it. Just forget about it. Move on. Nobody said, don't tell anyone else. What if Dodge sues you for talking about it, that it's possible to take these key fobs and do the replicators? But all those tactics are used by institutions, including churches. You can hear the patterns. There's denial, shame, blame, minimization, retaliation. In case you're the type of person that likes numbers, those are pretty eye-opening too. Every year there's about 120,000 vehicles stolen in Canada. Let's just assume almost every theft is reported. Almost all of them receive compensation. My brother-in-law had the full amount of his truck back in his bank account, like the value of it, in 30 days. There's about 460 sexual assaults in Canada every year. 10% are reported to police. Only 3 of those result in a criminal conviction every year, which is 0.00006%. Because most people don't have the resources, like Julie McFarland, or the energy to go through the whole process that's required to bring that case to court, and because of the shame, blame, minimization, retaliation. Now, I know that every analogy has its limits, but I think that this just really should be a wake-up call for anybody. If you're involved in your church with safe church policies, just think about, okay, are there procedures in place, the same kinds of ones to protect valuable people as we have for machines, right? And after my brother-in-law's truck was stolen, this didn't happen either. It didn't take him 24 years before he reported it. He didn't have to wait until he heard of somebody else who first had their truck stolen that he's like, okay, I guess I can report my stolen truck. He didn't even have to go to the police station to make a report. He didn't argue with the insurance company. He didn't testify in court. He didn't have to face the criminals, not that night, not years later. He didn't have to kind of awkwardly avoid the criminal at church or serve them coffee. He didn't have to wait 30 years for justice. He didn't have to get a law degree to make sure the perpetrators were prosecuted. He didn't need therapy. He didn't even need to find new friends because the old ones thought that it was his fault that he got robbed. He didn't have to move. He didn't develop insomnia. And he still drives. He still parks his car in the driveway. So, thank you for having me.
Angela Reitsma, Bick, thank you for being here. Pleasure. Thank you, everybody.